So now I'm going to have a quick explainer video on different types of epidemiological studies. And the two studies that I want to focus in on types are analytical studies that really focus in on causation and focus in on testing a hypothesis, and descriptive studies that really describe and plot. So what I mean by that is this. Epidemiological studies are carried out when disease or death occurs in an unexpected or unacceptable number. And so they use two different types of studies. And these are discussed in your book. One is the descriptive studies, really looks at epidemics with respect to person, place, and time. So they describe, and how you could think about this is a chart that plots numbers, a chart that shows a curve, a graphic showing a pie chart or a bar chart, okay? So it's descriptive. Analytical studies aim at testing a hypothesis. And a hypothesis, it's testing whether something causes something or not. And this is where I go on to analytical studies. This is where they test a hypothesis about a relationship between health problems and a possible risk factor. So they observe. They observe whether something happens if they expose people to something and whether they develop a disease, or whether if they're not exposed and they develop a disease. Or they might do an experimental study where they expose something to somebody and then they follow up to see if that person developed the disease. This can also go with clinical trials too, giving someone a treatment and seeing if it works. So this is where I go with the clinical trial. And with the clinical trial, they really focus in on seeing if you give somebody, let's say, a treatment, will they respond to it? And so in the case with pills, this is pills, you give someone the treatment and then you look to see if they improved or what happened. You do it again in another trial, and you do it again in another trial. And then it goes to FDA approval. It's the same with vaccinations. They go through this phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. This is called a clinical trial. And so one of the big things with this clinical trial is they use experimental design. And what that means is that they are using it to determine if something is effective, if a drug works. And what they do is they have one group have a blank treatment. And the blank treatment will be called the control group. Okay? Control group. And so placebo goes to the control group. This is the group that is not getting the treatment. And then they randomly sample. So they just statistically start to go every other person, or they pull them out. But they don't determine who's going to go on, who's going to get the placebo and who's going to get the treatment. Because of selection bias, they want to eliminate that. So they might be blind to who's got the treatment and who's got the control. They randomly select every other person. They may pull them out and use some formula to assign people to different groups. And then they use something called a probability value, which basically says that it's less than a 5% chance by chance that this happened. So, just like you're flipping a coin, and I said you have 50% chance that this might work or won't work, that's really not a good probability value. You want something less than 5% to say that, yeah, that's a good statistical sound chance of something working. And that really determines causation. Will this cause something else? These are all analytical studies. Analyze, analytical. The other type of studies are descriptive studies. And descriptive studies really focus in on person, place, and time. And they look at who's getting ill. They look at case count. They look at time, over time, how many cases. And so this is where epi curves come in, right? I'll show you to that again, epi curves, where you track it up. And then where, this is where they map out things. And they can see that one group is getting ill compared to another group. And they're not always going to the cause, right? They don't do an analytical study. They're describing it. They're looking at who, what, when, and why. And not so much the why. I should strike that. They're looking at who, when, and where, and then they're starting to gather data to get to the why. And that's a descriptive study. This is an example of a descriptive chart because it's showing an epi curve, all right? It doesn't track down so much the biological science of COVID-19. Nope. It's just plotting the case numbers, and this is an epi curve, and this is showing a descriptive, right? It's describing. So in summary, we talked about two different types of studies: analytical studies that really focus in on causation, they analyze, and descriptive studies that describe.